What happened in the late first and early second century, the Lord's Supper began to be viewed as a sacrifice that the Christians offered to God, which is an odd thing because Christians are not required to offer sacrifices. That was something done in the Jewish temple. That was something done also in pagan temples. They offered sacrifices. And the Lord's Supper represents the body and blood of Jesus that was given for us. It was his sacrifice for us. It is not our sacrifice for God. But nonetheless, this shift took place early on there in early second century. And it's just beginning to be introduced in a few different places. But then it begins to grow for the next few centuries. The next development you see is that churches now have an altar. This was not true in the first century, but the Lord's Supper, once it's viewed as a sacrifice, then the table upon which it sits becomes an altar. And it was common in Judaism as well as in paganism. Sacrifices were offered on an altar. But this is foreign to New Testament thinking. And then the third thing that happens, it starts to get really going in the third century, is the ministers who presided over that table began to be viewed as priests. And the term priest begins to be used in reference to the Christian leaders in the congregation at that time, which is really strange. You don't see that in the first century. You rarely see it in the second as well. But it's already getting full blown by the middle of the third century, especially with like Cyprian of Carthage. He uses that language extensively around 250 AD. And then the final step in this progression of thought happens by the fourth century, when if you're going to have a sacrifice that Christians offer, which is strange, and it's going to sit on an altar, which is also strange, and it's going to be presided over by a priest, which is not New Testament language, then the next step is the building in which these things took place began to be viewed as a temple. There is a speech recorded by Eusebius of Caesarea, a bishop, in around 320 AD. He is dedicating a magnificent cathedral that was essentially built with Constantine's money, and he calls it a holy temple of God, which is really strange in terms of Christian terminology. It's really strange in terms of first century terminology because the temple was done away with. Christians understood that they had no temples. And you see this clearly not just in the first century, but in the second and the third century as well. Christians resisted building any kind of temples. But by the fourth century, with the progression of this sacrifice, altar, priest, and then you have a temple in which all this stuff takes place. And that's how we pretty much got to where we are today, where we have these temples, these holy places, these houses of worship, which was a strange idea to the first century.